The fireflies are out tonight. They blink and flash across the parking lot of a Little League baseball field in a small Arkansas town. Tiny sparks of light in the summer darkness. A 6-year-old girl chases them with her friends, running and laughing, trying to catch the glowing insects in her hands. Her mother watches from the bleachers, checking on her every few minutes, reassured by the sight of her daughter playing safely just 75 yards away. It is June 9th, 1995. The town is Alma, Arkansas, a quiet community at the edge of the Ozark Mountains where nothing bad ever happens. The girl is Morgan Nick, blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing her green Girl Scout t-shirt and blue denim shorts. She is almost 7 years old and she has her whole life ahead of her. At 10:45 p.m., the baseball game ends. Morgan's friends head back toward the bleachers, but Morgan stays behind for just a moment. She sits down near her mother's car to empty the sand from her tennis shoes. A man has been watching her all evening. He is leaning against a red pickup truck with a white camper shell, smoking a cigarette. The children have noticed him, thought he looked creepy. They have seen him staring at Morgan as she played. Morgan's friends look back and see her talking to the man. They think nothing of it. They are children and they do not understand what is about to happen. When Colleen Nick reaches her car a few minutes later, Morgan is gone. Her shoes are empty. Her backpack sits on the ground. There are no screams, no signs of struggle. Her daughter has simply vanished into the night, taken by a stranger in a red truck that is already disappearing down the road. For nearly 30 years, no one knew who took Morgan Nick. No one knew what happened to her. No one knew if she was alive or dead. Her mother never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that someone somewhere would finally tell her the truth. In 2024, DNA evidence finally linked a suspect to Morgan's abduction. His name was Billy Jack Lynx. He was a convicted child sex offender who had attempted to abduct another little girl just 2 months after Morgan disappeared. He drove a red pickup truck with a white camper shell, and he had been dead for 24 years, taking whatever secrets he knew to his grave. Morgan Nick's body has never been found. She would be 36 years old today. This is her story. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we bring you another case that will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. Morgan Chantel Nick was born on September 12, 1988 in Ozark, Arkansas, a small town of fewer than 4,000 people nestled in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. Her parents, John and Colleen Nick, raised her in the kind of close-knit community where everyone knew their neighbors, where children played outside until dark, where doors were left unlocked because there was no reason to fear. Morgan was the oldest of 3 children. Her brother Logan was almost 4 years old in 1995, and her baby sister Taryn was a vibrant 22-month-old toddler. Morgan adored her siblings, playing with them constantly, taking her role as big sister seriously even at such a young age. She was a bright and imaginative child with dreams that changed from week to week. Sometimes she wanted to be a doctor. Other times she wanted to be a circus performer. She had signed up for the track team at school, but quickly quit because she did not enjoy sweating. Instead, she joined the Girl Scouts, where the activities were mostly indoors, and she could earn badges and make friends without running laps in the Arkansas heat. Morgan was 4 feet tall and weighed about 55 pounds. She had blonde hair that caught the light and bright blue eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She had 5 silver caps on her molars, temporary dental work that was scheduled to be removed in a few years. She was a healthy, happy, normal little girl with no idea that her life was about to be cut short. John and Colleen Nick were in the process of separating in 1995, though they had not yet divorced. Despite the strain on their marriage, they remained committed to their children, sharing custody without conflict, both determined to provide stability for Morgan, Logan, and Taryn. Morgan had recently moved in with her mother, but she still saw her father regularly. The family had no enemies. There was no custody dispute, no vengeful ex, no one who would want to hurt them. What happened to Morgan was not personal. It was random, opportunistic, the worst kind of crime, a predator who saw a vulnerable child and took her. On the evening of June 9th, 1995, Colleen received an invitation from a family friend to attend a Little League baseball game in Alma, a town about 30 minutes from their home in Ozark. The friend had children playing in the game, and it seemed like a nice way to spend a summer evening. Colleen agreed to go and brought Morgan along for some mother-daughter bonding time. They arrived at Wofford Field as the game was already underway. The ballpark was busy, filled with families and players and the sounds of cheering and aluminum bats striking baseballs. Local children ran through the parking lots and across the green spaces, playing tag and chasing each other while their parents watched from the bleachers. It was a Friday night in small-town America, the kind of scene that Norman Rockwell might have painted. Morgan sat with her mother through most of the game, occasionally untying Colleen's shoelaces as a joke and giggling when her mother pretended to be surprised. She was a playful child, content to be near her mother, not the type to wander off on her own. But as the evening wore on, two older children approached Morgan and asked if she wanted to catch fireflies with them. Morgan begged to go. Colleen hesitated. She did not know this area, had never been to this ballpark before. Her instinct was to say no. But the other parents reassured her that it was safe, the children played here all the time, that nothing bad ever happened in Alma. Colleen had always been told she was too overprotective. Maybe it was time to let Morgan have some independence. She said yes. Morgan ran off with her new friends, a 10-year-old boy named Ty and an 8-year-old girl. They headed toward a sand pile near the parking lot, a construction area atop a small hill where the fireflies were particularly thick. From where she sat in the bleachers, Colleen could see the children in the well-lit area, no more than 75 yards away. She checked on them visually 3 or 4 times over the next 15 minutes. Everything seemed fine, but there was something Colleen could not see from her vantage point. A red pickup truck with a white camper shell was parked near the sand pile, and a man was leaning against it, watching the children play. Ty and the other girl noticed him immediately. He made them uncomfortable. He had a scruffy beard and a hairy chest visible through his open shirt. He wore cut-off jean shorts and no shoes. He smoked cigarettes and stared at the children, particularly at Morgan. The man spoke with what the children would later describe as a hillbilly accent. He asked them a question, though investigators have never publicly revealed what he said. Whatever it was, it made the children uneasy. They kept playing, trying to ignore him, but they felt his eyes on them the whole time. At about 10:45 p.m., as the baseball game was ending, Ty and the other girl decided to head back to the bleachers. Their shoes were full of sand from playing in the construction area, and they stopped near their parents' car to empty them. Morgan stopped near Colleen's Nissan Stanza, which was parked a few dozen feet away, and began emptying sand from her own tennis shoes. Ty looked back and saw Morgan sitting on the ground, tying her shoelaces. The man from the red truck was no longer leaning against his vehicle. He was talking to Morgan. Ty turned and walked toward the bleachers. He assumed Morgan would follow. She never did. When the game ended and the teams began filing off the field, Colleen was momentarily distracted by the commotion. The children who had been playing with Morgan returned to the bleachers, but Morgan was not with them. They told Colleen that Morgan was at her car. Colleen walked to her Nissan Stanza. Morgan was not there. Her heart began to pound. She called Morgan's name. No answer. She looked around the parking lot, searching for that green Girl Scout t-shirt, that blonde hair. Nothing. She asked other parents if they had seen her daughter. No one had. Within minutes, Colleen knew something was terribly wrong. Morgan was not the kind of child who wandered off. She was somewhat shy, preferred to stay close to her mother. She would not have left the parking lot without permission. She would not have gotten into a stranger's car. But the red truck with the white camper shell was gone. It had vanished from the parking lot at the same time Morgan had vanished from the face of the earth. A coach called 911. Police arrived within minutes. The search for Morgan Nick had begun. That first night, officers searched the ballpark, the parking lots, the surrounding fields and woods. They checked nearby homes, knocked on doors, asked if anyone had seen a little girl in a green shirt. Volunteers joined the search, combing through brush and climbing into drainage ditches. Helicopters flew overhead with spotlights, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Tracking dogs were brought in to follow Morgan's scent, but the trail ended in the parking lot where she had last been seen. She had gotten into a vehicle. There was no scent trail leading away on foot. When it was a massive mobilization for a small-town police department that had never dealt with anything like this before. The Alma Police Department had roughly a dozen officers, a force equipped to handle traffic stops and petty crimes, not child abductions. But they threw everything they had at finding Morgan. Every available officer was called in. The Arkansas State Police joined the search. The FBI was notified. But Morgan was already gone. Whoever had taken her had driven away before anyone realized she was missing. She could have been anywhere by the time the search began, in another town, another county, another state. The Interstate 40 corridor ran through the area, a major highway that could take a driver to Oklahoma in minutes, to Texas or Tennessee in a few hours. The predator had a head start, and he used it. And as the hours passed and Morgan was not found, the nature of the search shifted. It was no longer a missing child case. It was an abduction investigation. Colleen Nick refused to go home. She could not bear the thought of returning to Ozark without her daughter, could not face her other children and tell them that Morgan was gone. For the next 6 weeks, she took up residence at a volunteer fire station next door to the Alma Police Department, doing everything she could to help with the search. She slept on a cot when she slept at all. She answered phones. She coordinated volunteers. She made flyers and distributed them throughout the town, stapling posters to telephone poles and placing urgent notices on the windshields of parked cars. She became a fixture at the police station, a mother who would not accept that her daughter was gone, and who believed that if she just worked hard enough, searched long enough, prayed fervently enough, Morgan would come home. Colleen even faxed letters to President Bill Clinton, begging the federal government to create a faster system for alerting the public when children went missing. At the time, there was no nationwide system for broadcasting information about abducted children. No network of alerts that could spread a child's photo and description across multiple states within minutes. Parents of missing children had to rely on local police, local media, flyers posted on telephone poles. It was not enough. The Amber Alert system would not be created until 1996, inspired by the abduction and murder of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman in Texas. But cases like Morgan's helped demonstrate the desperate need for such a system. And every hour that passed without an alert was an hour the abductor used to put more distance between himself and the place where he had taken his victim. A composite sketch was created based on descriptions from the children who had seen the man at the red truck. Ty and the other girl who had been playing with Morgan worked with police artists to reconstruct the face of the stranger who had been watching them. They described a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, between 23 and 38 years old, with a medium to solid build. He had black or salt and pepper hair combed back, a mustache, and about an inch of beard growth. He had a hairy chest and stomach. He wore cut-off blue jean shorts and was either shirtless or had his shirt open. He spoke with what the children called a hillbilly accent, and the sketch was distributed across Arkansas and neighboring states. It appeared on television news broadcasts, in newspapers, on posters plastered in store windows, and community bulletin boards. Someone must have recognized this man. Someone must have known who he was. The truck was equally distinctive. It was described as a red Ford pickup with a white camper shell that did not quite fit the bed, appearing to be 4 or 5 inches too short for the truck. The camper had windows covered with curtains and possible damage to the right rear. The truck had a dull paint job, faded by age and weather, with a short wheelbase and possibly Arkansas license plates. Police released photos and sketches of the vehicle, hoping someone would remember seeing it. Tips began pouring in. Within days, the Alma Police Department was overwhelmed with calls. Within weeks, they had received over 4,000 leads. They had to purchase a storage shed and extra filing cabinets just to organize all the information. Every tip had to be evaluated, every potential sighting investigated, every possible connection explored. But none of the tips led to Morgan. None of them identified the man in the red truck. Despite the massive publicity, despite the thousands of people who called in, the stranger who had taken Morgan Nick remained unidentified. What investigators did learn was that the man in the red truck had not appeared at the ballpark by accident. He had been hunting for a victim all day long, prowling the streets of Alma and the surrounding area, looking for an opportunity. On the afternoon of June 9th, before the baseball game began, though a teenage girl had been walking along the side of a road in Alma when a red truck with a white camper shell pulled in front of her. The driver, a scruffy-looking man matching the description of Morgan's abductor, asked if she wanted a ride to downtown Alma. Something about him frightened the girl. She said no and hurried away, walking as fast as she could without running. The man watched her go, then drove away. Later that same day in the northern part of Alma, two young girls, ages 5 and 6, were playing in their front yard. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day when children are supposed to be safe playing outside their own homes. Suddenly, the girls came running and screaming into the house, terrified. Their mother looked outside and saw a red truck with a white camper shell pulling away and driving off. Much something had happened, something that scared her daughters badly enough to send them running for safety. The mother reported the incident to police. These encounters painted a disturbing picture. The man in the red truck had been circling the area for hours, approaching children, testing their defenses, looking for a victim who would be vulnerable enough to take. The teenage girl had been too old, too savvy. The two little girls in the front yard had been too close to home, with a mother inside who might come out at any moment. He needed a child who was isolated, who was far enough from adult supervision that he could grab her before anyone noticed. He found that child at the Wofford baseball field in the parking lot late at night. Morgan Nick, alone for just a few minutes while her friends walked away. On June 10th, the day after Morgan's disappearance, the predator may have struck again, or at least tried to. In Fort Smith, 15 miles from Alma, a man attempted to lure a 9-year-old girl into the men's restroom at a convenience store. The girl resisted and ran away. Police believe this incident was connected to Morgan's abduction, though they could not prove it. The same man, or a copycat, the same red truck. The description was similar enough to raise alarms. Investigators believed all of these incidents were connected, that the same predator had been prowling the area looking for a victim. Morgan Nick had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been the one he was able to take. But who was he? Where had he taken Morgan? What had he done to her? For months, investigators chased leads across Arkansas and neighboring states. Once the case had attracted national attention, and tips came in from across the country. There were reported sightings of Morgan in Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee, Missouri. A blonde girl who looked like the age-progressed photos, a child who seemed frightened or out of place, a suspicious man with a red truck. Investigators followed up on every tip, no matter how unlikely. They traveled to interview potential witnesses, searching properties, looking for any trace of the missing girl. They dug through fields and searched abandoned buildings. They checked truck stops and rest areas along the interstate highways. None of the sightings panned out. None of the leads brought them closer to Morgan. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the hit television show that had helped solve numerous cold cases by bringing them to a national audience. Millions of viewers saw Morgan's photo, heard her story, learned about the red truck with the white camper shell. The segment generated thousands of additional tips. Still nothing concrete. Morgan's case was also featured on America's Most Wanted, the show hosted by John Walsh, himself the father of a murdered child. Walsh had turned his personal tragedy into a mission to catch criminals and find missing children. And he gave Morgan's case the full treatment. More tips, more leads, more dead ends. In January 2002, more than 6 years after Morgan's disappearance, police conducted a dig on a private piece of land in Boonville, Arkansas. They had received a tip claiming that Morgan might have been buried there. The tip was so specific, so detailed, that police felt they had to investigate. And they brought in cadaver dogs and excavation equipment. They dug through the property, searching for any sign of human remains. At 9:30 p.m., after hours of searching, police called off the dig. They had found nothing. They did not plan to return to the property. In November 2010, federal investigators searched a vacant house in Spiro, Oklahoma, for DNA evidence that could show Morgan had once been in the house. Oklahoma was just across the state line from Arkansas, an easy drive from Alma. If the man who took Morgan had taken her there, investigators wanted to know. In December 2017, investigators returned to the same house in Spiro after receiving another tip about the case. Cadaver dogs alerted investigators to a well on the property, which became the center of the investigation. Police spent 2 days searching the property, examining the well, looking for any sign of Morgan's remains. The search was called off on December 19, 2017. No evidence was found. Year after year, decade after decade, new leads continued to come in. Investigators continued to follow them. Morgan's case remained open and active, worked at the local, state, and federal levels, but the breakthrough never came. The man in the red truck was never identified. Morgan Nick was never found. In August 1995, 2 months after Morgan's disappearance, something happened that would eventually crack the case open. Unfortunately, it would take almost 30 years for investigators to put the pieces together. On August 29, 1995, in Van Buren, Arkansas, a town about 8 miles from the Wofford baseball field where Morgan had been taken, a man drove his red pickup truck to a Sonic restaurant on the corner of 5th and Broadway streets. He had been drinking, had consumed an entire fifth of rum that day, and he was looking for a victim. He spotted a group of children near the restaurant. 4 boys, 3 of them brothers, were with their 11-year-old sister. The man approached them and offered the boys money to leave so he could talk to their sister alone. The boys refused. The man then approached the girl directly, offering her money in exchange for sexual favors and asking her to get into his truck and come to his house. The girl ran back to the Sonic screaming and crying, calling for her brothers to call the police. The man sped away in his red truck, hitting a telephone pole in the process. Red paint from his vehicle scraped off onto the pole. A witness at the Sonic had written down the truck's license plate number. Police traced it to a man named Billy Jack Links. Links was arrested the next day, August 30th, 1995. He was interviewed by Detective Kevin Johnson of the Van Buren Police Department. The interview was calm, almost casual. Links was not combative or argumentative. He sat and talked with Detective Johnson as if they were having a normal conversation. During the interview, Links admitted to being at the Sonic that day. He admitted to seeing the children. He admitted to offering the boys money to leave so he could talk to their sister alone. He admitted to hitting the telephone pole when he drove away. He remembered being in Fort Smith earlier that day. He remembered the details of the children's appearance. And he remembered everything except the one thing that mattered most: what he had said to the 11-year-old girl. He claimed he was too drunk to remember that conversation. He had consumed a fifth of rum, he said. His memory was hazy. He could not recall the specifics of his interaction with the girl. Detective Johnson did not believe him. The man remembered too many other details from that evening to have conveniently forgotten the most incriminating part. He was withholding information because of the seriousness of what he had done. He knew exactly what he had said to that child, and he knew that admitting it would seal his fate. Investigators also questioned Links about Morgan Nick's disappearance. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. A child had been abducted from a ballpark just 8 miles away, 2 months earlier. The abductor had been driving a red truck with a white camper shell. Links drove a red truck with a white camper shell. He had just tried to abduct another child in that same truck. But Links denied any involvement in Morgan's case. He claimed he had no knowledge of the abduction, had never been to the Wofford baseball field, had never seen Morgan Nick. He appeared to be truthful during the interview, or at least convincing enough that investigators could not prove he was lying. Without any physical evidence connecting him to the crime, without any witnesses who could place him at the ballpark that night, investigators moved on to other leads. It was a decision that would haunt them for decades. Links was charged with sexual solicitation of a child for the Sonic incident. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Given the severity of the offense, the sentence was relatively light, but the evidence was overwhelming. The witness had written down his license plate. The red paint from his truck was scraped onto the telephone pole. The 11-year-old girl had provided a detailed description. There was no point in fighting the charges. Investigators later learned that Links had previous convictions as well. In 1992, he had pleaded guilty to first-degree carnal abuse, a sexual offense involving a child. He had been ordered to complete a counseling program as part of his sentence. He was on probation for that offense at the time Morgan disappeared, and at the time he tried to abduct the 11-year-old girl at the Sonic. In other words, Billy Jack Links was not a first-time offender. He was a repeat predator with a documented history of targeting children. He had been on probation for a sex crime against a child when Morgan Nick was abducted. He had violated that probation by attempting to abduct another child 2 months later. He drove a red truck with a white camper shell, matching the description of the vehicle seen at the Wofford baseball field. He lived in Van Buren, just 8 miles from where Morgan was taken. All the pieces fit. But in 1995, investigators did not have the physical evidence to connect him to Morgan's abduction. They did not have DNA technology advanced enough to extract usable genetic material from hair or degraded biological samples. They did not have the tools to prove what they suspected might be true. So they moved on, they pursued other leads, they followed other tips. And Billy Jack Lynx served his sentence and died in prison, taking whatever secrets he knew with him. Lynx died on August 5, 2000, at the age of 75. He was still incarcerated, serving his sentence for the 1995 attempted abduction. He never faced charges in Morgan Nick's case. He never confessed. He never revealed what he might have done to that little girl at the ballpark. If Billy Jack Lynx was responsible for Morgan's disappearance, and the DNA evidence now strongly suggests that he escaped justice. He died a convicted child predator, but not a convicted murderer. He died without ever admitting what he had done. He died without telling anyone where Morgan's body might be found. For years, the investigation continued without a breakthrough. Colleen Nick refused to give up hope. Even as months turned into years, even as the leads dried up and the media attention faded, she kept searching. She kept believing that someday, somehow, she would find out what happened to her daughter. In 1996, she founded the Morgan Nick Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing child abductions and supporting families of missing children. The foundation became her life's work, a way to channel her grief and desperation into something positive, something that might help other families avoid the nightmare she was living through. The Morgan Nick Foundation offered resources and support to families of missing children. It provided education programs for schools, teaching children about personal safety, about how to recognize dangerous situations, about what to do if a stranger approached them, and it worked with law enforcement agencies to improve their response to child abductions. It kept Morgan's story in the public eye, ensuring that her case would not be forgotten. 4 days after Morgan disappeared, while Colleen was still sleeping on a cot at the volunteer fire station, she felt compelled to meet with the mother of another victim. An 18-year-old girl from a neighboring community had disappeared 6 months earlier and had been found murdered. Colleen wanted to talk to this mother, wanted to ask her a question that had been consuming her thoughts. How did you survive it? The answer she received would guide her for the next 3 decades. The grieving mother told Colleen that she had to find a way to help others, to turn her tragedy into something meaningful. She could not change what had happened to her daughter, but she could work to prevent it from happening to someone else. She could be a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for children who could not protect themselves. Colleen took that advice to heart. She threw herself into advocacy work, speaking at conferences, training law enforcement officers, helping other parents of missing children navigate the nightmare of not knowing where their child was. She became one of the nation's most prominent voices for missing children, a tireless advocate who refused to let anyone forget Morgan. When Colleen returned home to Ozark after those first terrible weeks, she had to break the news to her other children. Logan, who was not yet 4 years old, could not fully understand what had happened. He only knew that his big sister was gone, that the playmate he loved was no longer there. "Why did you lose my sister?" he would ask his mother, his young face twisted with grief and confusion. "Go get her. I miss playing with her." Those questions must have been unbearable to hear. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that his sister was stolen, that there are evil people in the world who hurt children, that sometimes bad things happen, and there is nothing you can do to fix them? How do you look into your child's eyes and admit that you cannot bring a sister back? Colleen tried to shield Logan and baby Taryn from the worst of the pain, but the shadow of Morgan's disappearance hung over the family. It changed everything. It shaped who the children became, what they believed about the world, how they understood their place in it. The state of Arkansas honored Morgan by renaming its child abduction alert system the Morgan Nick Amber Alert, connecting police departments to over 250 radio stations for statewide emergency broadcasts. When a child was reported missing in Arkansas, the alert would go out immediately, broadcasting the child's description and any known information about the abductor. It was exactly the kind of rapid response system that Colleen had begged President Clinton to create, the kind of system that might have helped find Morgan if it had existed in 1995. Morgan's case helped inspire improvements in how law enforcement responds to child abductions across the country. The lessons learned from her disappearance, from the initial investigation, and the decades of searching that followed were incorporated into training programs for police officers. In other families would have a better chance of finding their children because of what happened to Morgan. In 2005, the Nick family and the Morgan Nick Foundation were featured on Extreme Makeover, Home Edition after the family's house was damaged in a water heater explosion. The show rebuilt their home, creating a new space for a family that had endured so much tragedy. It was a small kindness, a recognition of everything the Nicks had been through. But no renovation could bring Morgan back. No amount of media attention or public sympathy could fill the hole in Colleen's heart. Her daughter was still missing. Her daughter was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Colleen never stopped searching. She partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's the organization founded by John Walsh after his son Adam was abducted and murdered in 1981. Together, they created billboards displaying age-progressed images of Morgan along the Interstate 40 corridor, the highway that ran through Alma and stretched across the country. If Morgan was still alive somewhere, these billboards might catch the attention of someone who recognized her. If she was not alive, they would at least keep her case in the public eye. Colleen spoke at law enforcement training sessions, telling Morgan's story again and again, steeling herself each time to relive the worst night of her life. She wanted officers to understand what it felt like to be a parent of a missing child, to understand the desperation and the hope and the grinding uncertainty that never went away. She wanted them to work harder, search longer, never give up on a case just because years had passed. She created Team Hope, a peer support group for families of missing and exploited children, alongside Patty Wetterling, whose 11-year-old son Jacob had been abducted at gunpoint in 1989. Jacob Wetterling's case would eventually be solved in 2016 when his killer confessed and led police to his remains. Patty Wetterling understood the pain of not knowing, the agony of waiting for answers that might never come. Together, Colleen and Patty helped other families cope with the same nightmare. She became one of the nation's most prominent advocates for missing children, turning her personal tragedy into a mission that helped countless other families. She traveled across the country, speaking, training, advocating. She dedicated her life to the cause, or because it was the only way she could honor her daughter's memory, the only way she could make meaning out of meaningless loss. The fact that we have been doing this for 30 years stuns me, Colleen said in a recent interview. We just set out to help, and this kind of just grew almost by itself. The foundation that bears Morgan's name has become Colleen's life's work, but it is work that she never wanted to do. She would trade it all, every accomplishment and every life saved, for one more day with her daughter. In July 2019, something changed. Lieutenant Brett Hartland of the Alma Police Department was conducting a review of the early stages of the investigation when he came across information that drew his attention back to Billy Jack Lynx. Hartland started pulling statements and case files, reconstructing the events of June 9th, 1995 from every available source. He found references to a red truck with a white camper shell appearing throughout the day in multiple locations, before finally being spotted at the Wofford baseball field that night. The picture that emerged was chilling. The man in the red truck had been hunting for a victim all day long. He had approached a teenage girl on the road. He had frightened two little girls in their front yard. And then he had found Morgan Nick, alone and vulnerable, emptying sand from her shoes in a parking lot. Hartland and other investigators set out to find Lynx's red truck. It had been sold multiple times over the years, passing from owner to owner, but police were able to track it down in July 2020. The current owner had no idea who Billy Jack Lynx was, and readily gave permission for the truck to be examined. The FBI agents searched the vehicle and collected evidence, vacuuming various locations inside the truck to gather hair, fibers, and other biological material. They found blonde hair. They found trace amounts of blood on one of the seats. But in 2020, the technology was not yet advanced enough to extract usable DNA from the samples. In November 2021, the FBI publicly named Billy Jack Lynx as a person of interest in Morgan Nick's abduction. It was the first time anyone had been publicly identified as a potential suspect in the case. Agents asked the public for any information about Lynx, his life, his habits, his associates. They wanted to know everything about him, where he had worked, who he had known, where he might have taken a child. Lynx had been born and raised in Crawford County, Arkansas. He served in the United States Army during World War II. After the war, he worked as an upholsterer at Braniff Airlines in Dallas, Texas, from 1962 to 1974. He returned to Van Buren, Arkansas, sometime in the late 1970s and lived there until his arrest in 1995. Investigators believe Lynx had ties to states adjacent to Arkansas, including Tennessee and Oklahoma. They wanted to know about any properties he might have owned, any places he might have gone, any connections that could explain what had happened to Morgan. But the breakthrough would not come until 2023. In July 2023, Detective Sean Taylor of the Alma Police Department learned about an advanced DNA analysis system available at Othram Laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram specialized in extracting DNA from degraded or limited samples, and the kind of evidence that traditional forensic testing could not analyze. Taylor reached out to the FBI and arranged to have the evidence collected from Lynx's truck sent to Othram for testing. On December 1, 2023, the evidence was submitted to the lab. For months, forensic scientists worked to extract and analyze the DNA from the hair samples found in the truck. On September 27, 2024, Othram sent its report to Detective Taylor. The results were stunning. The hair found in Lynx's truck belonged to a member of the Nick family. Specifically, the DNA matched either Colleen Nick, one of her siblings, or one of her children. Investigators immediately conducted follow-up interviews with the Nick family. None of them had ever known Billy Jack Lynx. None of them had ever been in a truck similar to the one he owned in 1995. There was only one explanation for how Nick family DNA had ended up inside that red pickup with the white camper shell. Morgan had been in the truck. On October 1, 2024, nearly 30 years after Morgan Nick disappeared, Alma Police Chief Jeff Pointer held a press conference to announce the findings. The room was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and advocates who had worked on Morgan's case for decades. Colleen Nick was there, the mother who had never stopped searching, finally receiving confirmation of what she had suspected for years. For the first time, Billy Jack Lynx was officially named as a suspect in Morgan's abduction. Not a person of interest, a suspect. The most important thing here is Morgan is still missing, Chief Pointer said. But we have reached a point where we can concentrate on one suspect to determine the circumstances surrounding Morgan's abduction. The announcement was both a breakthrough and an acknowledgement of how much remained unknown. The DNA evidence proved that Morgan had been in Lynx's truck. It confirmed what investigators had suspected since 2021, but it did not answer the questions that Colleen and the rest of Morgan's family had been asking for 3 decades. How exactly had Lynx taken Morgan from the ballpark? Had he grabbed her? Had he lured her with promises or threats? Had she screamed? Had anyone heard? The witnesses at the scene had seen Lynx talking to Morgan, but no one had seen the actual abduction. It had happened in seconds, in the darkness at the edge of the parking lot, while everyone else was focused on the baseball game ending. What had happened to Morgan after she got into the truck? Where had Lynx taken her? What had he done to her? These were questions that the DNA evidence could not answer. The hair in the truck proved that Morgan had been there, but it did not reveal what had happened next. Had anyone helped Lynx abduct Morgan or conceal his crime? Had he acted alone? Were there accomplices who might still be alive, who might know where Morgan's body was hidden? Investigators were pursuing these questions, interviewing people who had known Lynx, searching for any information about his activities in 1995 and beyond. And where was Morgan now? Where had Lynx disposed of her body? Was she buried somewhere in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, in one of the states where Lynx had ties? Without knowing the location of her remains, the Nick family could never give Morgan a proper burial. They could never lay her to rest. They could never visit her grave. These questions remained open, and Chief Pointer acknowledged that the investigation was far from over. "We are working to expand our understanding of Lynx and his activities," he said. "This includes additional interviews and re-interviews of known associates and locating any additional physical evidence." Colleen Nick spoke at the press conference, her voice steady despite the weight of nearly 3 decades of grief and uncertainty. She had waited so long for this moment, for confirmation that the predator who had stalked her daughter had finally been identified. But she also knew that identification was not the same as justice, and justice was not the same as closure. "He stole Morgan from me," she said, referring to Lynx. "He stole her from her dad, and he stole her from Logan and Taryn. But he did not see that he could never win, because our love for Morgan, her memory, and her voice outlasted his life. And that love continues to shine. Morgan's heart shines on." It was a powerful statement, a declaration of victory even in the midst of ongoing loss. Billy Jack Lynx had taken Morgan's life, but he had not been able to extinguish her memory. He had not been able to make her family give up. He had not been able to escape identification, even 24 years after his death. The truth had outlasted him. An army of supporters, advocates, and heroes have rallied to uncover the truth about her disappearance, Colleen said. The identification of Lynx as a suspect was not just a victory for the Nick family. It was a victory for everyone who had worked on Morgan's case, everyone who had believed that someday the truth would come out. The investigation is ongoing. Police continue to search for information about Billy Jack Lynx, hoping that someone who knew him might come forward with details about his activities in 1995, about properties he might have visited, about places he might have hidden a child. They are asking about his life in Van Buren, his time working at Braniff Airlines in Dallas, his service in World War II, his connections to neighboring states like Tennessee and Oklahoma. Whether it was through school, work, church, or any social activity, we need information about Lynx and details about his entire life, the FBI has stated. Remember, and every piece of information about Lynx's life is important. No detail is too small or insignificant. Someone out there knows something. Someone who knew Billy Jack Lynx might remember a property he visited, a place he mentioned, a friend who helped him. That person might hold the key to finding Morgan's remains, to giving her family the closure they have been seeking for 30 years. The case has been featured in a 4-part docuseries called Still Missing Morgan, produced by ABC News Studios for Hulu. The documentary tells the full story of Morgan's disappearance, the decades-long investigation, and the 2024 breakthrough that finally identified her abductor. It features interviews with Colleen Nick, law enforcement officials, and others who have worked on the case. It brings Morgan's story to a new generation of viewers who might not have been born when she disappeared. Morgan Nick's body has never been found. She was legally declared deceased, but her remains have never been recovered. Wherever Lynx took her, whatever he did to her, her final resting place remains unknown. Billy Jack Lynx cannot be prosecuted. He died in prison in 2000, 4 years into his sentence for attempting to abduct the 11-year-old girl at the Sonic. He was 75 years old when he died, an old man who had spent his final years behind bars for a crime that was only a fraction of what he had done. He never faced justice for what happened to Morgan Nick. But the DNA evidence provides something that the Nick family has been waiting 30 years to receive. Answers. Not complete answers. Would not the closure of finding Morgan's body and giving her a proper burial, but the knowledge of who took her. The confirmation that their suspicions were correct. The validation that they were right to never stop searching. For 3 decades, the man in the red truck with the white camper shell was a faceless monster. A shadowy figure glimpsed by children who were too young to fully understand what they had seen. Now he has a name. Now he has a face. Now the world knows who Billy Jack Lynx was and what he did. Morgan Nick would be 36 years old today if she were still alive. She would be an adult woman, perhaps with children of her own, a career, a life. She might have become the doctor she dreamed of being as a child. She might have joined the circus. She might have done 1,000 things that we will never know, because Billy Jack Lynx stole her future along with her life. Her brother Logan and sister Taryn have grown up in the shadow of her disappearance. They never knew what it was like to have a normal childhood, to grow up without the constant reminder that their sister had been taken by a stranger. They lived with the uncertainty, the media attention, the endless searching. They watched their mother dedicate her life to the cause of missing children, knowing that the cause existed because of what had happened to Morgan. Taryn now works with the Morgan Nick Foundation, continuing the family's mission to help other families and find missing children. She has followed in her mother's footsteps, taking on the work that Colleen has been doing for 30 years. The foundation is not just Colleen's legacy, It is the entire family's legacy. He built on the memory of a 6-year-old girl who was taken from a ballpark while chasing fireflies. The fact that the family has remained committed to this work for 3 decades speaks to their incredible resilience and their refusal to let Morgan be forgotten. They could have given up. They could have moved on, tried to build new lives without the constant reminder of their loss. But they chose to fight, to advocate, to keep Morgan's memory alive. They chose to turn their tragedy into a mission that has helped thousands of other families. The case has transformed the Alma Police Department. A small-town force that had never dealt with anything like this before became connected to resources and training that they never would have accessed otherwise. Morgan's disappearance forced them to become better, more sophisticated, and more prepared for the unthinkable. They learned from their mistakes and their successes. They became experts in cases they never wanted to work. Retired Alma Police Chief Russell White, who started with the department just 11 months before Morgan's disappearance, has spoken about how the case transformed his career and his department. Being involved with a lot of other agencies and a lot of training, a lot of resources that we have access to that we never would have without this case, he said. Morgan's tragedy became a catalyst for improvement, for professionalization, for change. It also transformed child safety in Arkansas and across the nation. The Morgan Nick Foundation has educated thousands of children about personal safety and helped countless families navigate the nightmare of having a missing child. Or the Morgan Nick Amber Alert System in Arkansas has helped recover numerous children who might otherwise have been lost. The advocacy work that Colleen and others have done has influenced legislation, training, and policy at every level of government. None of this brings Morgan back. None of it erases the horror of what happened on June 9, 1995. But it means that Morgan's life, however brief, had meaning beyond her death. It means that other children have been saved because of what happened to her. It means that her heart, as her mother said, shines on. If you have any information about Billy Jack Links, his activities, his associates, or anything that might help investigators determine what happened to Morgan Nick, please call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. That number is 1-800-843-5678. Someone out there knows something. Someone might have the piece of information that finally brings Morgan home. Morgan Chantel Nick, born September 12, 1988, disappeared June 9, 1995. She was 6 years old. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She was 4 feet tall and weighed 55 pounds. She had 5 silver caps on her molars. She was wearing a green Girl Scout t-shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. She was last seen emptying sand from her shoes in the parking lot of a Little League baseball field in Alma, Arkansas. She was chasing fireflies with her friends on a summer night. She was a little girl who wanted to play outside after dark, who begged her mother for just a few more minutes of freedom. She was taken by a stranger in a red truck, a predator who had been hunting for a victim all day, one who saw his opportunity and seized it. Her mother never stopped searching. Her foundation has helped thousands of families. Her name is attached to the alert system that helps save missing children across Arkansas. Her case finally has a suspect, even if that suspect can never face trial. But Morgan Nick is still missing. Her body has never been found. Her family has never been able to lay her to rest. Somewhere out there, her remains wait to be discovered, wait to be brought home, wait to receive the proper burial that every child deserves. If you know something, say something. It is not too late. For Morgan. Thank you for watching. If this case affected you, please share this video. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a case. Leave a comment below telling us your thoughts on what should be done to find Morgan's remains and bring final closure to her family. And remember, hold your children close. Tell them you love them. Never take for granted the time you have together, because in one terrible moment, everything can change. Until next time, stay safe and watch over your children.